On a perfectly normal Tuesday morning, David was driving to work just like any other day. The sun was shining, traffic was light, and he was listening to his favorite podcast. David worked as a math teacher at the local high school, and he was actually looking forward to his first period class where his students were presenting their projects. As he approached a four-way stop, David noticed a police car in his rearview mirror. He didn't think much of it. Cops were always around this neighborhood. But then the flashing lights came on. David's heart sank a little, wondering what he might have done wrong. He carefully pulled over, making sure to follow all the rules he'd been taught since he was a teenager. Two officers stepped out of their patrol car and approached David's vehicle. Officer Williams walked up to the driver's side, while Officer Peterson circled around to the passenger side. "License and registration," Officer Williams said in a stern voice that immediately made David nervous. David reached into his glove compartment slowly, making sure to keep his hands visible at all times. He'd been through this before, and he knew how quickly things could go wrong. "Here you go, officer," David said politely, handing over his documents with a slight tremor in his hands. Officer Williams took the license and studied it for what felt like forever. He kept looking back and forth between David and the photo on the license, his expression growing more suspicious by the second. "Step out of the vehicle," he finally ordered. "Is there a problem, officer?" David asked, genuinely confused. He'd been driving carefully, hadn't been speeding, and all his paperwork was in order. "I said step out of the vehicle, now." Officer Williams's voice became more aggressive, his hand moving toward his belt. David complied immediately, raising his hands slightly as he opened the door. As he stepped out, Officer Peterson grabbed his arm roughly. "You match the description of a suspect we're looking for," Peterson announced loudly. "There must be some mistake," David said, trying to keep his voice calm, even though his heart was racing. "I'm a teacher at Lincoln High School. I was just heading to work, but the officers weren't listening." Officer Williams was now on his radio, speaking in code that David couldn't understand. "We need backup at 5th and Main. We've got our guy." "Please check my ID again," David pleaded. "Call the school if you want. They're expecting me for 1st. Period." Instead of listening, Officer Peterson spun David around and pushed him against the hood of his car. The metal was cold against David's face, and he could feel other drivers slowing down to watch the scene unfold. This was humiliating and terrifying all at once. "You're under arrest for resisting arrest," Officer Williams declared, even though David had done nothing but comply with every order. "But I haven't resisted anything," David protested, his voice cracking with disbelief. "I've done exactly what you asked." The officers ignored his protests as they roughly handcuffed him, the metal biting into his wrists. David's mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. He thought about his students waiting for him in class, about his brother, Kevin, who was a lawyer, about his clean record and upstanding life in the community. As they shoved him into the back of the patrol car, David caught his reflection in the window. He was wearing his usual work clothes, a neat button-down shirt and khakis. His teacher ID was still clipped to his belt. How could they possibly mistake him for some criminal they were looking for? The ride to the police station felt like the longest journey of David's life. He sat in silence, his mind replaying the events over and over, trying to understand where everything went wrong. The officers in the front seat were talking quietly among themselves, occasionally glancing back at him through the partition. All David could think about was how quickly a normal day had turned into a nightmare, and how his only crime seemed to be being in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong skin color. David sat in the cold, grey holding cell, wondering how everything had spiraled so out of control. The concrete walls seemed to close in on him with each passing hour. He'd never been in jail before, not even for a traffic ticket. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and he couldn't tell if it was day or night anymore. When the officers had brought him in, they'd taken his phone, watch, and even his shoelaces. He'd asked repeatedly to make his one phone call, but the desk sergeant just waved him off. "You'll get your turn," the man had said, barely looking up from his paperwork. 24. Hours passed, then 36. David's stomach growled constantly. The only food they'd given him was a stale sandwich and a small carton of milk that tasted like it had gone bad. His mouth was dry, and his head pounded from dehydration. He kept thinking about his students. What had they done when he didn't show up for class? Had anyone noticed he was missing? Finally, after what the guards told him was 48 hours, David was allowed to call his family. His hands shook as he dialed his brother Kevin's number. When Kevin answered, David almost broke down hearing a familiar voice. "Kevin, it's me. I'm in jail," David managed to say, his voice cracking. "What, David? What happened? Where are you?" "Downtown precinct. They arrested me on Tuesday morning. Said I resisted arrest, but I swear I did everything they asked." Kevin was already moving. David could hear him grabbing keys, shuffling papers. "I'm coming right now. Don't say anything else to anyone. I'll have you out of there as soon as possible." True to his word, Kevin arrived within an hour. As a lawyer, he knew exactly what to do. He posted David's bail and demanded to see all the paperwork immediately. What he found made his blood boil. The police report was nothing like what David had described. According to Officers Williams and Peterson, David had been driving erratically and matched the description of a wanted felon. The report claimed David had cursed at them, refused to show identification, and physically struggled when they tried to arrest him. It even stated that David had attempted to flee the scene. "This is completely false," David said, reading over Kevin's shoulder. "I never raised my voice, never struggled, and I gave them my license right away." Kevin's jaw clenched as he continued reading. The officers had also added additional charges: disorderly conduct, failure to obey a lawful order, and creating a public disturbance. Each charge carried potential jail time, and together they could put David behind bars for months, maybe even years. "They're trying to bury you under paperwork," Kevin said, his legal mind already working on a defense strategy. "This is textbook overcharging. They know the resisting arrest charge is weak, so they're throwing everything else at you, hoping something sticks." David's hands trembled as he held the police report. His whole life could change because of this. He'd worked so hard to become a teacher, spent years in school, built a good reputation in his community. Now it could all disappear because of lies written by two officers who'd never even given him a chance to prove his identity. "What about my job?" David asked quietly. "They must have called the school by now. I've been missing for 2 days." Kevin placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. "One thing at a time. First, we get you out of here. Then we figure out the rest." As they left the police station, David felt like he was walking in a nightmare. People on the street looked at him differently, or maybe he was just imagining it. Every time he saw a police car, his heart raced. This wasn't just about clearing his name anymore. It was about surviving a system that seemed designed to break him down, piece by piece. The worst part wasn't even the humiliation or the false charges. It was knowing that somewhere out there, the real suspect was still free, while he was paying the price for someone else's crime. Kevin had seen this before. Too many times. As a civil rights attorney for the past 12 years, he'd handled hundreds of cases where police had crossed the line. But this time it was personal. This was his baby brother sitting across from him in his office, still wearing the same shirt from 2 days ago, dark circles under his eyes, hands slightly shaking as he sipped coffee. "Tell me everything again, but slower this time," Kevin said, pulling out a yellow legal pad. His office was modest but organized, with law books lining every wall and case files neatly stacked on his desk. David had always admired how methodical Kevin was, but now he was grateful for it. David went through the story once more, and Kevin noticed things his brother missed. The way the officers had approached the car, the timing of when they asked for ID, the specific wording they used. Kevin had heard these same patterns in dozens of other cases. "David, this wasn't random," Kevin said, setting down his pen. "Officers Williams and Peterson. I've heard those names before. I represented a family last year where Peterson was involved in a very similar incident." Kevin turned to his computer and started pulling up files. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he accessed databases that most people didn't even know existed. "Look at this," he said, turning the screen toward David. "In the past 18 months, these two officers have been involved in 17 arrests. That's way above average for their district." David leaned forward, squinting at the screen. He could see a spreadsheet with names, dates, and charges. An uncomfortable pattern was emerging. Most of the arrests were in the same neighborhood, and most of the suspects looked similar to David. Are you saying they profile people? David asked, though he already knew the answer. I'm saying they have a documented history of questionable arrests, Kevin replied carefully, and I'm going to prove it. Kevin spent the next 4 hours making calls. He contacted his network of private investigators, other attorneys who specialized in police misconduct, and even a data analyst who helped him track patterns in arrest records. His approach was surgical. Document everything, leave no stone unturned, build an airtight case. We need to move fast, Kevin explained to David as he organized files into labeled folders. The police department has a 48-hour window to file official charges. After that, they either have to proceed or drop the case. Right now, they're hoping you'll take a plea deal to make this go away quietly. A plea deal? David was shocked. But I didn't do anything. That's the system, Kevin said grimly. They offer you a deal, maybe just probation, community service, a small fine. Most people take it because fighting costs time and money they don't have. The police get their conviction stats up, the prosecutor gets another closed case, and everyone moves on, except the person whose life just got permanently marked by a criminal record. Kevin stood up and walked to his filing cabinet. But they picked the wrong family this time. You have resources they didn't count on. You have me. He pulled out a thick folder labeled Police Misconduct, Standard Procedures, and spread its contents across his desk. Forms, templates, legal precedents, contact lists. Kevin had built this toolkit over years of fighting similar battles. Here's what we're going to do, Kevin said, his voice taking on the tone he used in courtrooms. First, we document everything. Every conversation, every phone call, every interaction. Second, we find witnesses. Someone must have seen what happened. Third, we request all body camera footage, dashcam recordings, and radio communications from that morning. David watched his brother work with a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because he knew Kevin was the best person to handle this. Sadness because Kevin had to handle this, because this was apparently common enough that Kevin had a whole system in place for it. Kevin, David said quietly, how many times have you done this? Kevin paused, looking directly at his brother. Too many times, David. Way too many times. But this time we're not just fighting for you. We're going to make sure these officers can't do this to anyone else. As Kevin picked up his phone to make the first of many calls, David realized his arrest wasn't just a personal nightmare anymore. It had become a battle in a larger war that Kevin had been fighting for years, and now David was on the front lines, whether he wanted to be or not. Kevin worked through the night, his coffee getting cold on the desk beside him. He'd called in favors from 3 different private investigators, each specialized in different aspects of police misconduct cases. The responses were coming in faster than he'd expected, and what they found made his stomach turn. David, you need to see this, Kevin said the next morning, spreading paperwork across his dining table. They'd moved to Kevin's house because his office felt too formal for what was becoming a family mission. The documents painted a disturbing picture. Officer Williams had been involved in 23 arrests over the past 2 years, with an unusually high number involving charges that were later dismissed. Officer Peterson had a similar record, with multiple complaints filed against him for excessive force. But here's the interesting part, Kevin continued, picking up a printout. None of these complaints ever went anywhere. They all got buried in the Internal Affairs office. The victims either dropped their complaints, took plea deals, or just gave up fighting. David's phone buzzed. It was his principal checking in. Teaching felt like a lifetime ago now, though it had only been a week since his arrest. Let me handle this, Kevin said, sensing David's frustration. You need to focus on getting better. Trust me on this. That afternoon, Kevin drove to the intersection where David had been arrested. He'd done this hundreds of times, visited crime scenes, talked to locals, looked for angles the police had missed. The area was busier than he'd expected, with a small cafe on one corner and a busy gas station on another. His first breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Linda, the elderly woman who ran the flower shop on the corner, had watched the whole thing from her storefront window. I've seen those officers before, she said, wrapping rose stems while she talked. They come through here every few weeks, and it's always the same thing. They pull over someone, things get heated, and they make an arrest. Linda walked Kevin to her window and pointed to where the incident had happened. Your brother was so polite. I could see him from here. He had his hands up the whole time, kept trying to talk to them, but they weren't listening. Kevin felt a surge of vindication. Would you be willing to write down what you saw, maybe testify if needed? Honey, I've been waiting 40 years for someone to ask me to stand up to these bullies. Of course I'll testify. His next lead came from the gas station manager, Antonio, who initially seemed nervous about talking to Kevin. But when Kevin mentioned he was representing the teacher who'd been arrested, Antonio's demeanor changed. I've got something better than just my word, Antonio said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. I've got the security footage. Kevin's heart raced. The police never requested it? Nope. They never even came by. I saved it on my personal drive because I knew it showed something they didn't want anyone to see. Back at the gas station office, Antonio pulled up the footage on his computer. Kevin watched in silence as the video played. The clarity was better than he'd hoped. It showed David's car being stopped, both officers approaching aggressively. David handing over his license immediately, and then the situation escalating despite David's visible cooperation. This is gold, Kevin whispered. Can you make me a copy? Already done, Antonio said, handing him a USB drive. I've been hoping someone would come asking about this. That man didn't deserve what happened to him. Kevin spent the rest of the week tracking down more witnesses. A jogger who'd passed by during the incident. A delivery driver who'd been stuck at the red light. A couple who'd been leaving the cafe. Each story was consistent. David had been completely compliant, and the officers had been unnecessarily aggressive. The most damning evidence came from a city traffic camera that Kevin's investigator had accessed through a Freedom of Information Act request. The footage showed the officers checking their phones multiple times during the arrest, as if they were confirming something or following instructions from someone else. This is bigger than we thought, Kevin told David one evening. Sifting through documents. These officers aren't just bad cops making mistakes, they're working a system. I found patterns in their arrests that suggest they're targeting specific areas, specific demographics, at specific times. David sat quietly, absorbing the information. So I wasn't just unlucky. No, brother. You were targeted, and now we're going to make sure everyone knows it. Kevin's phone rang. It was another witness who'd just called his office after seeing a news story about David's arrest. The momentum was building, and Kevin could feel the case getting stronger by the hour. What had started as a simple wrongful arrest was now becoming something much larger, an expose of systematic police misconduct that had been hiding in plain sight for years. Kevin had filed formal complaints before, but this time felt different from the start. He dropped off the paperwork at the police station's front desk on a Monday morning, making sure to get a receipt with the date and time stamped on it. The desk sergeant barely glanced at the thick folder of evidence Kevin had carefully organized. We'll look into it, the sergeant said flatly, tossing the folder onto a stack of other papers without opening it. I'd like to speak with someone from Internal Affairs directly, Kevin pressed. He'd learned over the years that being pushy was sometimes the only way to get movement on these cases. They'll call you when they're ready, was all he got in response. The first call came 3 days later. Detective Lopez from Internal Affairs left a voicemail suggesting they could handle this matter informally. No need to make a big deal out of this, she said. Sometimes these situations get heated, and officers have to make split-second decisions. Kevin called back immediately. This isn't about split-second decisions, he said firmly. Your officers arrested an innocent man with no criminal record, filed false reports, and held him for 48 hours on fabricated charges. I have video evidence, multiple witnesses, and documentation of a pattern of misconduct. There was a long pause. Well, we'll certainly look into that, Detective Lopez said, her tone shifting slightly. Send us what you have and we'll review it. Kevin sent another copy of all the evidence, this time via certified mail and email. Days turned into weeks. His calls to Internal Affairs went unanswered. When he finally reached Detective Lopez again, her response made his blood run cold. After a thorough investigation, "We've determined that Officers Williams and Peterson acted within department guidelines," she said, reading from what sounded like a prepared statement. "The arrest was lawful and the charges were appropriate, based on the suspect's behavior." "Did you watch the security footage I sent?" Kevin interrupted. "Did you interview any of the witnesses?" "Our investigation was comprehensive," Lopez replied coolly. "Case closed." Kevin hung up and immediately called his investigator friend Mike. "They're not even pretending to investigate. This is a cover-up," he said. "Check this out," Mike said, and Kevin heard typing in the background. "I did some digging on Detective Lopez. She's been in internal affairs for 8 years. In that time, she's investigated 127 complaints of officer misconduct. Want to guess how many resulted in disciplinary action?" Kevin already knew the answer would be depressing. "How many?" 3. And those were for minor infractions like being late for shifts. 0 officers have been disciplined for excessive force or false arrests under her watch. That afternoon, Kevin decided to go above internal affairs. He requested a meeting with the Deputy Chief of Police, Frank Rodriguez. The secretary made Kevin wait in the lobby for 2 hours before informing him that the Deputy Chief was unavailable indefinitely. "When might he be available?" Kevin asked. "Hard to say. He's very busy with budget meetings all month." Kevin knew. They were stonewalling him. He'd seen this playbook before, delay, deny, deflect, but this time he had something they didn't expect. That evening, Kevin called a meeting with David and their parents at his house. "They're trying to sweep this under the rug," he explained. "But I've dealt with this before. They're counting on us giving up, taking a plea deal, or just going away." "So what do we do?" their mother asked, worried lines creasing her forehead. "We go around them," Kevin said. "I've already contacted a prosecutor at the State Attorney General's office who specializes in civil rights violations. They can investigate independently of the local police department." Kevin spread out documents on the coffee table. "I've also filed a complaint with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. They have the authority to investigate patterns of police misconduct, which is exactly what we're dealing with here." "Will any of this actually work?" David asked quietly. "It's going to take time," Kevin admitted. "These departments move slowly, but we have one advantage: solid evidence and witnesses who are willing to testify. They can't ignore that forever." Kevin's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Drop the complaint or things will get worse for you and your family." He held up the phone for everyone to see. "And now they're trying intimidation tactics. Classic sign we're getting close to something they don't want exposed." "Should we be worried?" his father asked. "No," Kevin said firmly. "This actually helps our case. Threats like this prove there's something to hide. I'm going to forward this to the State Attorney General immediately." As the family sat in silence, processing everything that had happened, Kevin felt a familiar mix of anger and determination. He'd fought these battles before, but never when it was his own brother sitting across from him, looking lost and frustrated. "Listen to me," Kevin said, meeting David's eyes. "They're going to try everything to make this go away quietly, but we're not backing down. This ends now one way or another." Kevin stared at his phone at 2 a.m., watching the first video upload to social media. He'd spent weeks quietly building the case, but the threats and stonewalling had convinced him it was time to go public. The footage from Antonio's gas station was crystal clear. David's hands raised, trying to show his ID while the officers pushed him onto the car hood. "Are you sure about this?" David asked, sitting beside his brother in the dim light of Kevin's kitchen. "Once this goes out there, there's no taking it back." "They gave us no choice," Kevin replied. 3 weeks of them ignoring evidence, lying about investigations, and now threatening our family. Sometimes the only way to get justice is to make them face it in the light." The video went viral faster than either of them expected. Kevin had created a simple caption: "Math teacher complies with police, gets arrested anyway. Watch the full video. This could happen to anyone." By morning, it had thousands of shares. Local news stations started calling Kevin's office by noon. Channel 7's morning anchor, Patricia Kim, was the first to reach him directly. "We've been following similar stories for months," she told him. "Would your brother be willing to speak on camera?" David was hesitant at first, but Kevin convinced him that telling his own story was better than letting others tell it for him. The interview aired that evening during prime time. I teach algebra to ninth graders, David said calmly, sitting across from Patricia. I've never been arrested, never even had a speeding ticket. All I did was try to show them my ID. The footage played on screen as David spoke. Viewers could see him being thrown against his car, hear him saying, "Please check my ID," over and over. Patricia's co-anchor had to pause the video twice to compose himself. The response was immediate. Kevin's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Other victims of police misconduct started reaching out, sharing their own stories. Parents from David's school began organizing. Students created hashtags. The story was spreading beyond anything they'd imagined. "Kevin, we've got a problem," their sister called the next morning. "There's a reporter camped outside Mom and Dad's house." Kevin drove over immediately. 3 news vans lined the street, and neighbors were gathering on their lawns. His parents sat on their porch, overwhelmed but determined to support their sons. "We just want justice for David," their mother told a Channel 9 reporter. "He's a good man who doesn't deserve any of this." The police department's response came that afternoon through their spokesperson, Captain Miller. "We're reviewing the incident thoroughly," he read from a prepared statement. The officers involved followed proper procedure based on the information available at the time, but the damage to their credibility was already done. The local NAACP chapter announced they were supporting David's case. The teachers' union released a statement demanding accountability. 3 city council members called for an independent investigation. Kevin organized the first peaceful protest for the following Saturday at City Hall. He'd worked with community organizers for years and knew how to do it right. Permits filed, speakers lined up, volunteers trained in peaceful demonstration tactics. "We want justice, not revenge," Kevin told the crowd from the steps of City Hall. Over 200 people had shown up, holding signs that read, "End police misconduct" and "Justice for David." David spoke briefly, his voice shaking but strong. "I never wanted to be the face of anything like this. I just want my life back, and I want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." The counter-pressure came 2 days later. An unsigned flyer appeared in neighborhood mailboxes, calling the protesters anti-police agitators and questioning David's version of events. It included a blurry photo of David from his college days, trying to make him look threatening. "They're getting desperate," Kevin told David, showing him the flyer. "This usually means we're close to something big." He was right. That Wednesday, the mayor's office called. They wanted to meet privately to discuss a resolution. Kevin insisted on bringing his own legal team and refused to meet behind closed doors. The meeting lasted 3 hours. The city's lawyers offered multiple settlement deals, each one requiring David to drop all complaints and sign a non-disclosure agreement. Kevin turned down every offer. "This isn't about money," he told them firmly. "This is about accountability and making sure these officers can't do this to anyone else." The final breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A whistleblower from inside the police department leaked internal emails to a local journalist. The emails showed that Internal Affairs had been instructed to minimize the investigation, and that Officers Williams and Peterson had been warned about outside scrutiny weeks before Kevin's complaint was filed. The story hit the front page of the Sunday paper. By Monday morning, protesters weren't just local anymore. Activist groups from other cities were joining the cause. The police chief's office was flooded with calls demanding action. Kevin's phone rang. It was Detective Lopez from Internal Affairs, the same person who'd tried to bury the case weeks earlier. "Mr. Johnson," she said, her tone completely different now, "I think we need to talk again about your brother's case." The courtroom was packed on the morning of David's hearing. Kevin had expected a few supporters, but teachers from 3 different schools had shown up, along with students, parents, and community members. David sat at the defendant's table, wearing the same blue tie he'd worn at his first job interview 5 years ago. "All rise," the bailiff announced, as Judge Patricia Williams entered. She was known for being tough but fair, and Kevin had specifically requested her for this case. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Michelle Chen, started first. Kevin had dealt with her before. She was usually reasonable, but the department had been pressuring her office to take a hard line on this case initially. "Your Honor," she began, but then paused, shuffling through her papers. Something had changed. Kevin could see it in her body language. After reviewing new evidence that came to light this week, Chen continued, the state is requesting that all charges against David Thompson be dismissed with prejudice. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. David looked at Kevin with wide eyes. Even though Kevin had suspected this might happen, hearing it out loud was surreal. Furthermore, Chen went on, the state acknowledges that our initial charging decision was based on incomplete information. The evidence clearly shows Mr. Thompson complied with all police commands during his arrest. Judge Williams raised an eyebrow. That's quite a reversal, Ms. Chen. Please explain. Chen gestured to Kevin's table, where he had stacks of evidence organized in neat binders. Defense counsel has provided video evidence, witness statements, and documentation that contradicts the arresting officer's reports. Additionally, our office received information suggesting this may be part of a larger pattern of misconduct. Kevin stood up. Your Honor, if I may. Please proceed, Mr. Johnson. Kevin walked to the center of the courtroom holding a tablet. I'd like to show the court the security footage from the morning of my brother's arrest. The bailiff dimmed the lights, and Kevin played the video on a large screen. The room fell silent as everyone watched David being pushed against his car, his hands visible the entire time, clearly holding his license. As you can see, Kevin narrated, my brother never resisted. He repeatedly tried to provide his identification and explained he was a teacher heading to work. He clicked to the next exhibit. These are statements from 5 witnesses who saw the arrest. All tell the same story. Mr. Thompson was cooperative throughout. Judge Williams leaned forward. What about the officer's report that states Mr. Thompson was disorderly and attempting to flee? That's where it gets interesting, Your Honor. Kevin pulled out another folder. Since filing my initial complaint, 14 other citizens have come forward with similar experiences involving Officers Williams and Peterson. We've documented a pattern of false reports and excessive force. The judge's expression grew stern. Are you suggesting these officers have done this before? I'm not suggesting it, Your Honor. I'm proving it. Kevin handed copies of the documentation to both the judge and prosecutor. These are sworn affidavits from people who experienced identical situations with these officers over the past 2 years. A commotion started in the gallery. Captain Miller from the police department, who'd been sitting in the back, whispered urgently into his phone. Prosecutor Chen stood up. Your Honor, in light of this evidence, the state not only moves to dismiss all charges, but also recommends immediate suspension of Officers Williams and Peterson pending a full internal investigation. Motion granted, Judge Williams said firmly. All charges against David Thompson are hereby dismissed with prejudice. The court also orders that this case file be forwarded to the State Attorney General's office for further investigation into potential criminal misconduct. The courtroom erupted. David's students cheered from the gallery. His mother sobbed with relief while his father patted Kevin on the back, but Kevin wasn't celebrating yet. He stood and addressed the court one more time. Your Honor, my client requests that these proceedings remain public record. Too many similar cases have been buried in closed-door settlements. The community deserves to know what happened here. Judge Williams nodded. So ordered. Everything discussed here today becomes part of the public record. As they left the courthouse, reporters crowded around. David, no longer the timid man who'd been arrested weeks ago, spoke confidently into the microphones. I'm grateful for justice today, but this isn't just about me, he said. If my brother hadn't been a lawyer, if we hadn't had the resources to fight this, I'd probably be in jail right now. How many others have been convicted because they couldn't afford to fight back? Kevin's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Lopez. Officers Williams and Peterson have been placed on unpaid suspension effective immediately. Full investigation to follow. That afternoon, the police chief held a press conference announcing major reforms to the department's complaints process and body camera policies. He even mentioned that Officers Williams and Peterson would face possible criminal charges if the investigation revealed they had committed perjury in their reports. Justice moves slowly, Kevin told David as they drove home. But sometimes, when enough pressure builds up, it moves all at once. David looked out the window at the city he'd called home for his entire life. Think this changes anything for the next person they pull over? It's a start, Kevin replied. A real start. And that's more than we had last month. The next morning, David returned to his classroom for the first time in over a month. His desk was covered with welcome back cards from his students. As he began teaching his first period algebra class, he realized that fighting for justice had taught him more about real-world mathematics than any textbook ever could. The aftermath moved faster than anyone expected. 3 days after David's charges were dropped, Kevin got a call from a number he didn't recognize. It was Officer Thompson from the police department's records division. "Mr. Johnson, I need to speak with you privately," she said, her voice shaky. "There's something you need to know about your brother's case." They met at a quiet cafe outside the city limits. Officer Thompson, a veteran of 15 years, looked nervous as she slid a thick manila envelope across the table. "I've been watching this case unfold," she began. "What happened to your brother? It's not isolated. Williams and Peterson are part of something called the Productivity Program. Officers get bonuses for hitting certain arrest numbers." Kevin opened the envelope and found spreadsheets, internal memos, and email chains. The documents showed a clear pattern. Officers were being rewarded for arrests, regardless of whether those arrests led to convictions. "The chief knows about this?" Kevin asked, scanning the papers. "He created it," Officer Thompson replied. "Said it would make the city look tough on crime for the mayor's re-election campaign. But some of us new officers were making questionable arrests to hit their numbers." The next day, Kevin held a press conference on the courthouse steps. He presented the new evidence to a packed crowd of journalists and community members. "This wasn't just two bad cops making a mistake," Kevin announced. "This was systematic misconduct encouraged by department policy. The chief created a culture where officers were rewarded for arrests, not for protecting citizens." The mayor's office scrambled to respond. Mayor Johnson, no relation to Kevin, held an emergency meeting with the city council that same afternoon. By evening, Police Chief Robert Harrison was asked to resign. "I take full responsibility," Harrison said at his resignation press conference, though his words felt empty. "These were not the policies I intended to implement." But his resignation was just the beginning. The State Attorney General's office, armed with the evidence Kevin had compiled, opened a criminal investigation into the entire department's practices. 2 weeks later, Officers Williams and Peterson were arrested at their homes. The grand jury had issued indictments for assault, filing false police reports, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. The courtroom was packed again, but this time they were the defendants. The new interim police chief, Chief Maria Rodriguez, held her first town hall meeting a month later. David and Kevin attended, sitting in the front row as she outlined sweeping reforms. "Every officer will now wear body cameras that cannot be turned off during interactions with the public," she announced. "We're eliminating the productivity bonus system immediately and implementing de-escalation training for all officers." She continued, "We're also creating an independent civilian review board with the power to investigate complaints and recommend discipline. No more internal affairs, investigating itself." During the question and answer session, David stood up. "Chief Rodriguez, these reforms sound good on paper. How do we know they'll actually be implemented and not just disappear after the media attention dies down?" Chief Rodriguez looked him in the eye. "Mr. Thompson, I understand your skepticism. That's why we're partnering with community organizations to oversee these changes. Every step will be transparent, and progress will be reported publicly every quarter." The Federal Department of Justice also got involved, placing the entire department under a consent decree. This meant federal monitors would oversee the changes for at least 3 years, ensuring the reforms were actually implemented. The civil lawsuit was filed simultaneously. Kevin represented not just David, but 12 other victims who had come forward with similar experiences. The city, eager to avoid a lengthy trial that would expose more departmental problems, settled for $2.3 million divided among the plaintiffs. But the biggest change came from an unexpected source. Officer Thompson, the whistleblower, helped establish a program called Command Presence, where officers were required to spend time in communities without their uniforms, learning to see residents as people rather than potential suspects. 6. Months after David's arrest, he received a letter. It was from Officer Peterson, now facing potential jail time himself. "Mr. Thompson," it read, "I know my apology means little now, but I want you to understand that I've had time to think about what I did. The department culture taught us to see everyone as a threat, to prioritize numbers over people. That's not an excuse, but it's an explanation. I'm paying for my actions now, as I should." David showed the letter to Kevin. "Think he means it?" "Doesn't matter if he means it," Kevin replied. "What matters is that the system that created him is changing." The trial of Williams and Peterson lasted 3 weeks. Both were found guilty on all counts. Williams was sentenced to 2 years in prison and prohibited from ever working in law enforcement again. Peterson received 18 months and the same lifetime ban. The day the sentences were announced, David returned to the intersection where he'd been arrested. Linda from the flower shop waved at him. Antonio from the gas station gave him a thumbs up. The community that had witnessed his humiliation was now celebrating his victory. "You know what's crazy?" David told Kevin as they drove home. "I still get nervous when I see a police car. But at least now I know there's a system in place to hold them accountable." "It's going to take time," Kevin said. "Real change always does, but we've proven it's possible." The public apology came 9 months after David's arrest, on a crisp Tuesday morning. The city had rented the main auditorium at the community center, knowing that many people would want to witness this moment. Mayor Johnson stood behind a podium decorated with both the city seal and flowers from local residents. "On behalf of the City Council and the entire police department, I want to offer a formal apology to David Thompson and his family," the mayor began, his voice carrying through the packed room. "What happened to Mr. Thompson was a violation of his civil rights and everything we claim to stand for as a community." David sat in the front row between Kevin and their parents. He'd worn his best suit, the one he saved for parent-teacher conferences. His students were scattered throughout the audience, some in their school uniforms even though it was Saturday. "The settlement we're announcing today is not just about compensation," the mayor continued. "It's about acknowledging that we failed one of our citizens, and we're committed to ensuring this never happens again." The financial settlement was larger than anyone had expected. $350,000 for David alone, with additional compensation for his legal fees and lost wages. But more importantly, the city had agreed to create a $2 million fund for police reform and community policing initiatives. After the ceremony, local news stations wanted interviews. David had gotten used to speaking publicly by now, but each time still felt surreal. "What will you do with the settlement money?" Channel 7's reporter asked. David glanced at Kevin before answering. "My brother and I have talked about this a lot. We're starting something called the Justice Partnership Foundation. We want to help people who can't afford lawyers when they face police misconduct." The idea had come to them gradually over the previous months. Kevin's office was flooded with calls from people who had experienced similar situations but couldn't afford legal representation. Most cases settled with plea deals simply because fighting was too expensive. 2 months later, the foundation officially opened in a modest office on the east side of town. Kevin had recruited 2 other civil rights attorneys to work pro bono, and they'd partnered with law students from the nearby university who needed real-world experience. "Our goal is simple," Kevin explained to the foundation's first board meeting. "We want to level the playing field. Everyone deserves good legal representation, not just people who can afford it." David took a leave of absence from teaching to help run the foundation. His classroom management skills translated surprisingly well to organizing community outreach programs. They established weekly Know Your Rights workshops at local churches and community centers. The first case the foundation took was eerily similar to David's. A nurse named Patricia had been arrested while driving home from a night shift. The officers claimed she was driving erratically, but hospital security footage showed her leaving work normally just minutes before. "This shouldn't be happening to anyone else," David told Patricia during their first meeting. "We're going to fight this together." 6 months after its opening, the foundation had helped over 40 people. Some cases were settled before trial, others required full legal battles, but each victory built momentum and changed lives. The most unexpected moment came when David received a letter addressed to The Justice Partnership Foundation. It was from Officer Williams, who was serving his prison sentence. Mr. Thompson, the letter read, I've been following the news about your foundation. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I want you to know that your courage in standing up to what happened has forced me to confront my own actions. I'm using my time here to study civil rights law. Maybe someday, when I'm released, I can help prevent others from making my mistakes. David read the letter to Kevin over dinner. What do I do with this? That's up to you, Kevin said. But remember, justice isn't just about punishment. It's about change, education, and making sure these things don't happen again. 1 year after his arrest, David returned to the exact spot where Officers Williams and Peterson had handcuffed him. This time he wasn't alone. Over 100 community members gathered for the dedication of a new community police oversight office located right across from that intersection. Chief Rodriguez, who had transformed the department's culture, stood beside David as they unveiled a plaque. In memory of all those wrongfully arrested and in hope for a better future, the Justice Partnership Foundation. You know the best part about all this, David said during his speech that day. I don't want my students to know me as the teacher who got wrongfully arrested. I want them to know me as someone who helped change a broken system. As the ceremony ended, Linda from the flower shop handed David a small bouquet. For your classroom, she said with a smile, for the new semester. David looked at his brother, then at the crowd that had supported them through everything. The nightmare had ended, but the work had just begun. Their painful experience had become a pathway to justice for countless others. That afternoon, David returned to his classroom for the new school term. As students filed in, chattering about summer vacation, he realized something profound had changed. He wasn't just teaching algebra anymore. He was teaching young people that when systems fail us, we have the power to change them. Who wants to learn about rates of change today? He asked his class, thinking about how much can change in just 1 year when people refuse to accept injustice. The foundation kept growing, and with each case they took on, the Thompson brothers proved that sometimes the most powerful force for change comes not from anger, but from the determination to ensure no one else experiences the same pain. Your